It's been about 2 months since my last Grand Race meta video, and there have been a lot of changes this time. Let's go! Real quick before we get into it, if you're looking for any of my Motorfest tunes or possibly others in the community like Acor or Rhino the Raccoon or Simji or Goliath, you can find those tunes on the Motorfest Pro Settings app on my website. It's militiagamingco.com. All right, let's get into it. Now, I know everyone has their own favorite cars to use, and I haven't tested all of the cars in each category. So to help the community, you can leave your favorite cars in the comments of this video. Just make sure you include the category and the car, and maybe a brief reason why you like using it. So for this video, I'm going to do it exactly like I did the last video. I'm going to be showing you a full list of all of the meta cars in each class. And I know that's kind of confusing because there's really only like one, maybe two meta cars in each class. I'm basically just giving you a top 10 or a top 5 for each of these classes. And I'm organizing these in the best, contender, and viable categories. All right, let's get into it. So with Street 1, we have a very nice change at the top of the list. The Porsche 911 RS 2.7, which was a new addition as of Season 3, is now the best car in the class. I will say that the RS2 Avant is actually still really good, and that's why it's in the best category along with the RS3. The Focus RS was moved down into contenders, and then we had a new addition to the contenders with the Defender 110. This is recent. I literally just tested this car, and it is an absolute blast to drive. Certainly a car that no one suspects, and it's actually good enough to contend with those best cars, and it's really going to depend on your driving skill at that point. Now, we also moved down the 89 MX-5. I had it in contenders. It is now moved down into viable, meaning you can use it and not do terrible with it, but you might actually have to do well with your other classes in that race in order to win. And the same thing with the Corvette C2 2.0 edition. This is a car that you can actually get in a Twitch drop bundle, and then it should be coming to the store at some point, but that Corvette C2 got moved down as well. I did drop one car from the viable category, and that was the Grand Cherokee SRT8. It just doesn't make the cut with the rest of these cars. All right, moving on to Street 2. So there is a little bit of a shakeup on my list. Last month we didn't have the F40 this high. I've moved it up since then because I feel like it's a very good car, and it actually took a long time for me to realize this. It's even better if you have a clutch, and a lot of the sweats are using the F40. I personally like the TTRS Roadster as well, and both of those cars compete with the 993, but I will say this, the 993 is head and shoulders above those other two cars. However, those two cars can sort of hang in there, and actually the F40 more so than the TT. As for the contenders, we had to drop two cars from that best category, and those were the Hurricane and the ZR1. The Hurricane really is only good in very specific situations, and it's just a car that a lot of people pick, and so I have to include it in this list. I think it deserves to be in this top 10. It's just like not super competitive with those top 3 cars. The ZR1 is a very solid pick, and honestly on this I probably should have it above the Hurricane, but the contender category is not really ordered in the correct order, so it's in there the same as the Hurricane. And then I've actually added the SL63 4MATIC. This car is very surprising. Now, it does understeer just a little bit, and so if you don't like that, you're not going to like driving that car, but it actually is a very good car. It's fast, it's got good top speed, it corners well, but not quite as good as the cars above it. And then we've got the Honda NSX, which might be the most underrated car on my list. It is a very good car along with the Viper Lightning Edition. I had to drop both of those into the viable category in order to make room for the SL63 and then the two cars above that in the best category. And then because we added 2 brand new cars to Street 2, that means 2 other cars had to leave, and I dropped the Corvette C8 Stingray, which is also a solid car. I just think that the other 4 above it are just a tiny bit better. And the Audi Scotto's Coupe, again, very solid car, just maybe not quite as good as the 4 cars above it. So those 2 are out, and the other new additions are in. All right, let's move into drift. There really hasn't been any real changes to drift. You just have to add the Evo 6 Flow Edition to the best in terms of drift racing. Remember, this is for grand racing. This is not for drifting on the drift trials or the drift tracks. This is specifically for grand racing. I added this because it is significantly faster than the Agera R, the Aventador, and the Murcielago. It's a very solid pick, but to be honest, nothing compares to the Unicorn. It's just way too good. All right, moving into the racing category. Now this is very interesting. We had a couple of cars added from the Gordon Murray brand, and both cars are actually going to make it on the list. this T50S in the racing category is very good. I mean, it is very close to the Camaro SS. Some of the sweats, shout out to Goliath and Simji for this information, but both of them have said that the T50S really is almost exactly the same as the Camaro SS. It just has better acceleration off the line, and it has a slight tendency to sort of reject the gutter. Now, they both gutter well, but like, if you hit the gutter too hard, it might reject it and the car kind of bounces. The Camaro SS never has a problem in the gutters. So anyway, shout out to those guys for that information. I really appreciate it. I haven't spent that much time with the T50S, but I know it's a solid car and I take that information from them. Anyways, I also have the Gallardo Super Trofeo, which has been in there for a long time. And then for the contenders, I had to drop one of them out, and the Ferrari 458 is the one that I've dropped out. And then I also moved down the Bolide. If you've been watching a lot of my content, you know that I actually really like the Bolide. I think it handles fairly well. It does understeer, obviously, but I still kind of like it as a newbie car, you know, something that's very controllable, something that's easy to learn. You're not taking corners at full speed. You do have to slow down with the car, but it is very controllable. So I'm actually going to keep it in the viable category, but I do realize it's not quite as good as the cars above it. And finally, we did have to lose one car because we added a new car to the racing category. The 370Z is no longer part of this list. We have dropped it out, but it is decent. If you guys use it with a good tune, I feel like it still is viable, but I don't want to carry more than 4 cars in that viable category because this list is just going to get very long. Before I get into the hypercar category, about 75% of you guys are not subscribed to the channel. If you find this info helpful, please consider subscribing. I bring Motorfest videos to you every single day. All right, let's get back to the list. Let's move into hypercar. At the very top, the #1 spot is not changed. I still think the Agera R is better than the T50, but we added the T50 to the list because it's really, really good. I mean, it is so controllable. I think for newish players, I think the T50 is definitely the way to go. It's a much better pick than the Agera R, and to me, it's sort of a stepping stone between the 110 and the Agera R. The Agera R is very hard to control, but is very, very fast. The 110 is very easy to control and very good for newbies. However, it's not quite as fast. The T50 is right in between. It's very fast. It keeps up with the Agera R in most cases. It just doesn't have the lateral G-stat to take some of these sharper corners like the Agera R does. So that's where it struggles, but it's very good, controllable. Like I said, good for new players. We move down into the hypercar contender category. I've dropped the F8. It used to be up there with the best. It is now in the contenders. I see it very similarly to the Jesco and the EB110. The EB110 understeers a little bit more than the F8. The F8's back end is a little bit wild, and the Jesco, again, is very controllable, very fast, not quite as good as the top 3. And then because we added that one, we had to drop down the 458 Special. It was in the contender categories. I just don't think it's as good as the Jesco, the F8, or the EB110. And finally, we did have to lose one car from this list, and the Reventon is the one that got the axe. It's just not quite as good. Now, it is a very good off-road car, so if there's any off-road sections that you're trying to complete with a hypercar, the Reventon's a good choice. The next 2 categories, there haven't been any changes, so we're just going to show you the meta list for both Alpha GP and Motocross. These are the top ones you want to pay attention to. Everything else in those categories is just whatever. All right, let's move on to Rally Raid. So in the Rally Raid department, there has been one truck that just keeps popping up over and over on every stream of every sweat, and that's the Tacoma. The Tacoma is insanely good in almost all scenarios, and it beats the Z4 by a little bit. I think the Z4 is very, very good, especially when you get it into slipstream scenarios. I think the Z4 does very well, but the Tacoma has really good top speed, especially when bombing down hills. It's a little bit bouncy, but if you get a good tune on it, it really does fly. Z4 moved it down 1 notch because it used to be the top dog, but I think the Tacoma is definitely taking that position at this point. And then the Jeep Evo 2 is still super, super good. Not quite as good as the other 2. As far as the rest of the category goes, it's been the same for a couple of months. We got the Skyline GTR, the 959 Raid, the H1 Alpha, the H1 Alpha Evo 2, and then for the viable category, we've got the Race Touareg 3, MX-5 Miata, and the Rough 3400K. All right, moving on to Rally. We have a new king in the Rally department. In my opinion, it's the Peugeot 205. I know a lot of people think that the Maxi is fast. I've tested both. I think the Peugeot is much more controllable for most players. I think the Maxi deserves to be on this list. I just don't know where to put it yet because I do have to test it, and it's basically undrivable with like a high steering sensitivity with all the bumps and off-road. It is very, very twitchy. If the car jumps at all, you're very likely to lose steering. So it's just a hard car to test. I need more time with it, and I will have it on this list at some point because it is just way too fast not to be on the list. So please don't kill me in the comments there. I prefer the Peugeot 205, but if you want to use the Maxi, I think it's going to be in this list somewhere. Anyways, we moved down the C3 and the Countryman all 4. The Fiesta got moved into the contender category. I think it's really fast, not quite as good as the C3 or the all 4. And then we also moved the Mini Cooper S into the viable category. So the Mini Cooper S got bumped as well. And finally, we're at Monster and Plane. And for Monster, the only truck you should be using is the Silverado. And for Plane, it's the P51 Mustang. Those were the only viable options for those categories. I really wouldn't use anything else. They are head and shoulders above everything else in the class. It does not make sense in Grand Race scenarios to use anything other than those. All right, lastly, before I go, I'm going to show you the Grand Race rotation as it's currently built. This includes the brand new Diamond Head location, which features Hypercar, Street Tier 2, and AGP. It's an awesome addition to the game, except for we have Street 2 off-road, and that sort of throws in some curveballs as far as the meta list goes. If you happen to get the dirt path on Diamond Head on Street 2, my suggestion is to use an all-wheel drive car. A lot of the Lamborghinis are all-wheel drive. Maybe go that route. I'm not really sure, but definitely all-wheel drive seems to work better. I found the F40 to actually be pretty good as well, even though it's not all-wheel drive. It actually felt pretty controllable and easy to use. So anyways, take that with a grain of salt, but you can screenshot this. This is the full Grand Race rotation, and keep in mind each of these locations has a 30-minute timer before it moves on to the next one. Once you finish with 21, which is Waikiki, moves right back up to the top to number 1. All right, helping people is what I'm trying to do with this channel. So if you guys have any questions, send me a DM. I literally read every single DM that comes my way, and that is a real thing. It's not a joke. I personally read every single message. So if you have a question about something or a particular car, you just want to ask a question about the game in general, doesn't have to be related to a video, you can send me a DM. And if you feel like I'm bringing enough value to the table here, please consider memberships. I do have memberships enabled on the channel. Just click the join button from the channel homepage, and that gives you access to certain perks like sneak peeks at upcoming videos, members only community posts and polls, and a 20% off coupon to my Shitbox t-shirt store. A link to that is also in the description. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. We'll catch you on the next one. Trigger out.